All right. Hello and good morning. This is going to be video 901, and it's going to be kind of in the dark. uh, it's early. What can I say? A couple things on my mind. I this is that I don't necessarily know I could even come up with a good title. Um oh, um as I was driving this morning, I thought about the Supreme Court of the United States and how kind of the Supreme Court is kind of like it's like you can elect a new president every 4 years, right? And I'm not too sure on the congressional side. I know there's elections every 2 years, and I don't know how long a senator serves, a representative serves. Could be 4 years, could be 6 years. I don't know. Um, but like the legislative, it's a longer term of office, and you can be reelected, right? So kind of like a tick. Once you attach yourself, okay, it's probably very hard to get removed, right? But then the judicial side, Supreme Court, they're lifetime appointments, right? I mean, you could be like in our situation, we have three relatively young Supreme Court judges who will be with us for a long time. Anyway, so um, president comes along, you don't like what they do, they screw up. Okay. There's a pretty good chance they won't get reelected, even though it's like the most powerful position, leader of the free world, right? Um, Congress folk, they seem to last longer, but again, if you elect a bad one, they don't do anything. Um, there's a chance they might not get reelected. But again, a Supreme Court justice, I mean, if your political views might be more liberal than conservative, um, in our current situation, I mean, we're talking 10, 20, maybe 40 years that the Supreme Court is going to be stacked against you, at least your point of view. Okay. And really, I'm trying not to say one is better than the other. If you believe that, women don't have rights and whatnot, then you're probably pretty happy. Um, if you're black or you're a woman or you're gay, you're probably unhappy right now. And you're going to be unhappy for another 20 or 30 years because even though you might have a very liberal, I hate to say that word, I'm going to say progressive. If you have a very progressive president, they can do executive orders and they can say, the my administration supports gay rights. My administration supports da da da. They have the power of that speech. But they can't really make laws and they can't do away with laws, right? That's the legislative. So I guess what I'm leaning towards, what I'm driving towards, is that If you had a really bad system or way of looking at things, um, really, the president is going to be the first one to really kind of be the uh, canary in the coal mine, as it were, to say, hey, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And, they can speak as much as they want. Um, your legislative, it's like that power is broken apart or, fractionated and coming and going. And really, like I said, you have your ticks, people that are just, they, you know, can serve over and over and over again. But again, your Supreme Court, man, um, the whole point of it is to interpret the Constitution, but they are affected by the lens. They see things through their political views. And so I kind of thought about how, you know, um, there was a Supreme Court opening during President Obama's administration, and I think it was McConnell. There were people in the Senate who were like, "Oh, it's not the people. It's under the people's decision, and we should wait till there's a new president." They weren't going to let um, a politician who was on their way out pick this new Supreme Court justice, right? So that was an opportunity to put a justice on the court that was more liberal, more progressive. And then you had Trump, who was um, a one term failure as a president, just across the board. Um, he got to put three people in the Supreme Court. Now, by the same logic, let the people decide. You don't want a president, a politician on their way out shouldn't choose. Same logic, right? Well, somehow now you had McConnell and the people saying, oh, no, it's the president's duty. It's the president's obligation. You know what I mean? So, anyway, it's a bunch of horse shit, you know. But again, you can have society change. As the executive branch, the executive is, um, your day to day administration, keep things going. And the legislative is supposedly fixing issues, okay? Addressing issues on kind of a medium term. But the Supreme Court, the judicial, they can totally fuck with everything else. you know, the judicial Supreme Court can say, oh no, the president is out of bounds. The Supreme Court can say, no, the Congress it's unconstitutional, the law. So really, you know, I guess where I'm at, um, it's going to be a long time. It's going to be a long, 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 long time until the more anti-progress court. It's going to be a long time until they're not in the majority. You know, the Supreme Court is sort of the hey, let's slow this down even more. But that said, put on your imagination helmet and imagine the Supreme Court of the future. You know, of around the time that we have flying cars and jetpacks, okay? We may even have teleporters by then, okay? Like Star Trek. Way in the future. Um, just if the progress is any sort of trajectory as far as, the people, um, you might one day have a transgender president. You might have a Congress that's more representational of America, more women, um, more black people, more Latinos, um, more non Christians, just for diversity, not to knock Christianity. It just at the moment the majority of Congress are white, male, Christians, okay, and it's not representative. When you go to the grocery store, depending on where you live, um, when you drive down the street, you see all different types of people, right? So, because of the turnover rate and the only fact that you can like serve 2 consecutive terms, the president is likely going to be, you know, um, now obviously congressional. We do have a number of LGBTQ Congress folk. That's going to be on the rise, and um, again, it's going to take some time, but a time will come when, in theory, Congress is more representational of America. Um, in the same way that you have, um, you know, some 62, 65% of America is against a total abortion ban. Um, if you left that up to the states by Democratic vote on a state ballot, kind of like we saw in Kansas and Idaho, um, you know, the voters just by the voting with their feet. Okay, I don't know who votes with their feet, but just by voting, could make it that women have rights. Okay, there's more women than men in the United States. So anyway, in the future, like I said, put on your helmet. Way in the future. In the future, okay. Even the Supreme Court would be balanced. As hard as that is to believe, and mentally, I like the idea of there being a Supreme Court that has black, Latino, Latina, transgender, non-binary representation. And there was an article or a video of a young lady that I can't remember her name, Kitty, Cat, something, and she talked about she spoke at a political meeting, and she said, "You all have been discussing transgender, what you're going to do about transgender rights, but you've never asked a transgender woman or transgender men or a transgender child or youth or teen to speak. You've never produced a medically or a psychologically accredited person, anyone with any sort of authority, to speak about the effects of mental health, these anti-transgender laws against members of society, And so representation, I guess, is the key word. Ooh, the key word. Sorry, today I was like, if I don't use my voice here, I'm going to lose it. I don't want to lose it. So today I am using this voice as much as I can. Uh, What was I going to say? So anyway, so in the future, we saw this week that there was a baker who refused to bake cakes for gay couples in Colorado. And initially, it kind of one court would side with him, one court would side not with him. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And um, they said, no, you can't discriminate. And he said, well, my cake is an artistic expression. And the cake was literally the transgender flag. Okay. I mean, rectangle with 5 horizontal lines, two blue, two pink, one white, right? The transgender flag, okay? That was the cake. And he said that it was an artistic expression. It was his freedom of speech, okay? And that's why he should be able to say, no, I won't cook it because it's against my religious views, you know. And again, I kind of thought about that in the future. A lot of stuff that kind of was acceptable, it's not going to fly, you know. In my state yesterday, 2 or 3 days ago, the state legislature, one of the Republican, they proposed a bill to ban furries in schools. Okay. And the as a way of basically saying you identify as something else. Okay, it was an attack on transgender people, right? And the person who knew this was coming invited members of 3 different Indiana school boards to come in, 3 superintendents. And she said, before we get into, da da da, he presented it. She was like, um, you know, let's just take a look at what's going on in our schools. Mr. A, um, do you have a problem with furries in your school? And he was like, no, madam, I think I've never heard of such a thing, and there's nothing in my district. And she was like, oh, okay, well, Miss B, do you have a problem with furries in your school? And she's like, no, it's completely preposterous. And that pattern repeated itself, and it just kind of showed how stupid this little bill was. Um, so again, I take that to our Supreme Court of the future. Again, way in the future. I mean, Star Trek, teleporters, maybe even an alien species, who knows? And someone's going to come up and say something that would easily be acceptable today, you know, my religious views. Oh, um, there's going to be enough people in the Supreme Court that will argue the point, but you are going to have public opinion and the norms of society, which change, right? Our norms, not what is normal, but our norms, our rules, what's acceptable. There's a term for some kind of envelope, what public opinion is, favorable, disfavorable. And that is going to be so far in a different direction. This argument about furries, the Supreme Court, might say, well, is the furry bothering you? Let's look at the what is wrong with people expressing their creativity. You know, you might even have a Supreme Court justice say, "Well, Mr. So and so, I have to share with you, I'm a furry." You know what I mean? I mean, it's going to be so far in the other direction, because you're going to have generations of people who, you know what I mean? The way things were was so controlling, and that's going to be so different, you know. At least that's kind of my current realization about the last, I have to think about when did it start. It wasn't until the communism scare in the 60s, a civil rights scare, white people afraid of black people having rights. That's when the Confederate memorials went up. Um, but it was something like 200 years ago when Christianity, people, started to embrace. Oh, that's back in the 60s is when we put "In God We Trust" on the money, right? Um, but if you looked at American currency in the 1900s, well, 1800s, there's no mention of God. No "In God We Trust." Um, there's just a lot of things that maybe for 400 years, um, there's been a movement of, again, what I kind of think of as control white people, for lack of a better word, people in power. Christianity is such a white, male dominated religion, misogynistic, keeping women at bay and everything. Um, again, as that is falling out, if you look around, I've seen a number of articles about churches unable to sustain themselves because they can't get they can't get a congregation together. Um, I just think is the trajectory, you know, if you're trying to predict future patterns and Christianity loses its touch, something else might come in its place. I made a video, I think, about the if you were an Aztec or a Mayan, you had this great society, you had science and um, all these wonderful things, and a religion system that fell apart when it encountered another religious system. There could be something called New Christianity or Neo Christianity, which is like actually following the Gospels and nothing else. You know, Jesus saying love one another, and Jesus standing up for people who are being trodden upon. If you did away with the Old Testament and you did away with all the other shit, the books of the apostles and everything, and you just had the Gospels as the way they were written prior to, was it 1946? Is when they swapped out pedophilia for homosexuality. Um, can you imagine? I mean, that would be very popular. Neo Christianity. That could be the next thing, and then given 100 years, given 4 or 5 generations, people are going to totally forget. I mean, you'd still have some people, but makes you wonder. Anyway, I'm out of time, so I need to stop. But just kind of, I think the future is bright. um, we just have to get there. We just have to survive long enough. We're like we're like Jews hiding out in Nazi Germany at the moment. We um, we just have to wait. At the same time, we have to be visible because um, even though we are the scapegoat and the boogeyman, the other at the moment, we fight that by being visible. So, all right, I'm out of time, so I gotta go. But I wish you the best of luck in being your authentic self as you define it. And on that note, bye bye.